I am part of a demolition team on the East Coast of the United States. I am often hired to inspect old and decrepit buildings that pose possible health hazards to people and other structures nearby. Most of what I do is conducted on the outskirts of town, where the old city lines used to be. As time passed and the city grew, much of the older buildings became too small and forced people to relocate to the newer part of town. It's kind of neat seeing all of these old buildings abandoned by society in their own little realm of a forgotten time, but it's also kind of sad. These old buildings were often built with an outdated design that I found beautiful, thus making my job somewhat bittersweet. I worked with a close crew that I've known for some time, and we all get along very well. It's like working with some of your closest friends, which makes the time go by very fast. There was this one time we were offered to do a bid on an inspection and demo of this old beautiful church that was no longer structurally sound for people to visit. It would be cheaper to demo and rebuild with cheaper materials, rather than try to restore the building to its former glory. A big part of demolition that most people do not consider is that there's a science in bringing down a structure that isn't meant to fall over. Not only that, but also to contain the demolition as much as possible. This old church was known throughout town as being haunted by old spirits or something. I'm not superstitious, but I have seen things that I've yet to explain. Needless to say, when I heard this offer to take up the creepy old church building, I only saw it as a nice, easy paycheck. When I broke the news to my team, I got a mixed reaction. Apparently, I was out of the loop in terms of gossip, and some Satanist group has been coming in and out of that building over the years. As odd as that is, this is something that shouldn't be new to my team. We often come across squatters that take residence in the old abandoned buildings. They are either too high on drugs to move, or just as scared as we are when we find them. Nothing that a group of 6 strong demolition guys couldn't handle. We pull up to the church site and most of the building has been boarded up by these old tattered boards that could easily be removed. My job upon inspection is to look at the structural integrity and document the current condition. I exited my work truck with half of my crew, while the other half pulled in behind us in another truck. On the ride over, they kept going on how they wanted nothing to do with the basement of this church. I guess that's where the majority of the Satanist rituals were performed or something. Being indifferent to the paranormal, I rolled my eyes and offered to do the basement inspection by myself. However, that would make the process twice as long. If someone simply would just man up and do it with me, we would be out of there in half the time. My team finally entered through a decaying board that was partially destroyed that was covering a doorway. My team and I were able to see that the main floor of the church was covered with trash. It looked like 5 or so crazy parties were hosted here, and no one ever cleaned up from the previous one. It made walking on the floor quite difficult. Before I was able to accept the offer on the church, I first needed to go in the basement and check out the foundation, see how difficult it would be. If the foundation was reinforced, I could then renegotiate the offer for a higher bid. Like I said before, my crew wasn't exactly volunteering to go in the basement with me. I had to assign someone. I selected a random crewmate to come down in the basement with me, and off we went. The current church that we were in had not had electricity for about 15 years, so we had to use our flashlights. As we were descending the stairs into darkness, I started to realize how deep this basement was. Most basements are about 15 feet underground, while this one was more like 40. The deeper we went into the basement, the less graffiti that we saw. Even I was second guessing coming down here. We finally reached the bottom of the basement, and we entered what appeared to be a large open room. The large open room had these large castle-looking pillars holding up the structure. Each pillar was about 5 feet wide, and oddly enough had these large-looking chains hanging off of them. The chains seemed to be connecting from pillar to pillar, but oddly enough didn't seem to be supporting the structure in any way. The chains were used for something else. I shined my flashlight around the basement in hopes to see the back wall, but unfortunately, I didn't see it. The floor of the basement was this gravel mixture that made sounds when you stepped on it. I took a couple steps into the basement, starting to count the pillars that supported the church, when I started to hear the rustling of chains in the back of the basement. For a brief moment, I thought it was the coworker that I brought down in the basement with me, but after a quick search with my flashlight, that wasn't the case. He was standing behind me. I shined my flashlight in the direction of the noise, but I didn't see anything. I called out to see if anyone was there, but no one responded. I figured that it was probably some type of small animal, or even a gust of wind, so I continued pressing forward into the dark basement. If there was someone down here with me, me and my coworker would be able to take care of the situation. We continued pressing forward until we reached the back of the basement. It was much further than I anticipated. We started inspecting the foundation that was holding up the church. A few minutes in, I heard a sound that was both unexpected and horrifying. Coming from my right in the corner of the basement, I heard what sounded like a little girl crying for help. My coworker and I immediately shined our flashlights all around the basement. For a few seconds, we couldn't see anything. That is, until my coworker's flashlight rested on something peering behind a pillar. We were able to catch a glimpse of what appeared to be a hand and half of a face. The hand had fingers that were incredibly long, and the face was pale with very dark eyes, neither of which looked to be human. We only saw it for a brief moment before it retracted behind the pillar. That brief moment was all I needed to see before I started sprinting back to the stairs. Thankfully, my coworker and I were on the same page, and he was sprinting with me. Whatever the thing was that we saw didn't chase us, however, it did start to scream. We could hear the chains being rattled where the creature was. We made it to the stairs and we sprinted up them. Our coworkers were startled to see us running up the stairs. It didn't take much convincing to get everyone out of there. Once everyone was out of the church, we told them what we saw in the basement. The crew looked horrified when we told them what we saw. Obviously, no one wanted to work on this project. Thankfully, I was in a position that I could still decline this project, which I did. This was one of the few times that I've declined an offer, but obviously I think it was for a good reason. I'm not sure what to make of what was in the basement. I'm not completely sure if it was my eyes playing tricks on me, or if there was actually some kind of creature down there that was chained up. Needless to say, it's something that I hopefully never have to see again. My one friend told me this story about how his father was almost killed out in the middle of the woods. When my friend's father was younger, he and his family would stay in this cabin that was out in the middle of the woods. The cabin was situated next to a lake that was fairly secluded. Technically, they shared the lake with a neighbor that they were actually really good friends with. The neighbors were this older couple, and they would only come out during the summer. Other than the neighbors, they wouldn't see anyone else out there. They basically had the lake to themselves. When my friend's father was 15, he thought it would be fun to take him and his buddies out to the cabin and spend the weekend out on the lake. This would be the first time that my friend's father would be out at the cabin without an adult. This took place during the 80s, so there were no cell phones. My friend's father is named Tim, so Tim's parents dropped him and his friends off at the cabin. Tim wouldn't have any communication with the parents until the weekend was over. The first thing the boys did when they got to the cabin was to get into their swimsuits and run down to the lake. The lake had a floating dock, as well as a canoe that the boys would use. When the boys first got to the lake, they realized that the old couple next door were not home, so they had the entire lake to themselves. After playing on the lake for a couple of hours, one of the boys noticed a figure coming out of the neighbor's house. The figure was tall, unlike the neighbors that lived there, and his face was very pale. When they first saw him, they were standing on the floating dock, which was a good distance away from the shore. Tim almost immediately knew that whoever this man was, it was certainly not his neighbor. A chill ran down his spine when he finally realized why the figure looked like he had a pale face. the figure was wearing a mask. The boys, not knowing what to do, just stood on the floating dock. After 10 minutes of staring at the figure and the figure staring back, the man walked off into the woods, out of their sight. With it getting dark soon and them not knowing what to do, they decided to jump off the dock, swim to shore, and run back to the cabin. From there, they'd be able to wait it out through the weekend until the parents came back on Sunday. The group of boys were able to make it back to the cabin without any sign of the masked man. However, upon arriving to the cabin, they noticed that the back door was ever so slightly left ajar. Tim, having grown up in this cabin, knew that you really had to pull the door shut in order to close it. If you didn't close it all the way, the door would slowly open. Thankfully, him and his friends were at a distance that they could still turn around without alerting the person inside. Tim didn't have absolute proof that there was someone inside. There were no footprints leading to the door. The door being left open could have very well been Tim or one of his friends. Instead of going inside, Tim recommended that they'd stay the night in the treehouse that wasn't too far away. The treehouse was very well concealed. It was a good midway point between the lake and the cabin. By staying there, they would be somewhat safe for the most part and be able to keep an eye on the lake and the cabin at the same time. However, staying in the treehouse would have its obvious downsides. For one, none of the boys had packed a flashlight. By the time they went to the lake, it was still early afternoon. Another downside to the treehouse is that it had no food. A busy day on the lake with a bunch of teenage boys is sure to rack up an appetite. The boys were pretty hungry, but they were more afraid than anything. The boys quietly made their way to the treehouse and climbed up. By this time, the visibility was incredibly low since it was dark out. Tim and his friends waited in the treehouse for a couple of hours. Nothing really happened. All of the boys were getting annoyed since they were so hungry. Right before the boys were about to climb down the ladder to the treehouse, they noticed something. The light to the cabin turned on. A wave of fear washed over the boys as their suspicions were now confirmed. Not only did the cabin light turn on, but they were also seeing movement from inside. The treehouse was about 70 yards from the cabin, so their visibility wasn't great, but they were fairly certain the man inside was the same man earlier that was wearing a mask. The man inside rummaged around for about 20 minutes or so before coming outside with a flashlight. The man shined the flashlight all around as if he was looking for something. The man would pace back and forth frantically. His movement with the light was sporadic. The man started making his way back to the lake, which was bad news. The treehouse was directly in the path to the lake. The man would have to walk directly next to the tree the boys were hiding in. If the man would shine his flashlight upwards, the boys would be done for. Somehow, the boys were able to keep their crying down just enough that the man couldn't hear him. When the man walked past, they could hear him talking to himself. "They're out here somewhere." The man continued walking to the lake, not noticing the treehouse full of boys above him. The man continued walking until he was out of sight. The boys took this opportunity to climb down the ladder and run inside. Once inside, they were able to lock all the doors and windows. Like I said earlier, the cabin didn't have a telephone. Their best option was to wait it out all weekend, which they did. Thankfully, they didn't see the man after that. When Tim's parents came to pick them up, he told them what had happened. The parents were obviously upset at the situation and never let Tim do that ever again, which for Tim, he was actually quite thankful for. A couple of years ago, we went house hunting on the east coast of the United States. We were generally looking for some good deals on houses. That typically includes older homes. Although some homes are out of date, that doesn't mean that they can't be beautiful. Our plan was to buy an older home, fix it up, and make it look new. We spent a full Saturday house hunting. The houses were either out of our budget or simply too small. The last and final house that we looked at seemed to be perfect. It was built in the 70s, had plenty of space, and it was incredibly cheap. We did a quick tour with the real estate agent. She was a very bubbly personality and extremely excited that we were interested in this home. The house wasn't exactly what we were looking for, but it was very close. The money that we would be saving on this house would be enough for us to remodel it. The house was 2 stories and a basement. We did a quick walk around of the house. The house seemed to be in pretty good condition. The last thing for us to look at was the basement. I opened the door to the basement and peered down. The basement looked unfinished. The real estate agent's personality abruptly changed. She went from being bubbly and happy to very anxious and uneasy. I asked her if she could show us the basement, to which she refused. She told us that we could look at it ourselves, but for personal reasons, she wouldn't be joining us. This obviously made me feel uneasy about the basement, but if I was going to buy this home, I definitely had to look at the basement. My wife and I both went down the stairs and did a quick inspection of the basement. It honestly looked like your average unfinished basement. To be honest, nothing looked to be out of place. However, I did notice in one of the corners of the basement, there appeared to be char all over the wall and floor in that area. I figured that perhaps there used to be an old fireplace in this corner, and I didn't think anything of it. We went back upstairs to the real estate agent, to which she seemed to be fine. Things seemed to work out, and we eventually bought the house. We moved in and everything seemed to be fine. That is, until we started to remodel a couple of months later. We started with the basement. The contractors that we hired to finish the basement for us reported smells of something burning. I would go down into the basement to smell for myself, and I didn't smell anything. Our washer and dryer were in the basement, so I was down there about 2 or 3 times a week. The more I would go down there, the more uneasy I started to feel. I remember one night I went down there to dry a blanket that I accidentally spilled something on. While I was down there, I could finally smell it. I smelled something burning. The smell only lasted for a few seconds, but the smell was horrendous. It was as if I was walking by something that was on fire. The smell immediately went away. I figured that the smell was somehow associated with my dryer. I went back upstairs and thought nothing of it. A couple of days later, I was working in my garage by myself. I was putting boxes away when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something red walk out of the garage. For a brief second, I thought it was perhaps a contractor that had gotten lost and made his way out into my garage. I quickly went the way I saw the person walking. To my surprise, I didn't see anyone. I did a quick walkthrough of my house, and oddly enough, I was by myself. I was fairly certain I saw someone, but then again, I couldn't find who it was, so I just went back to what I was doing back inside the garage. A couple of weeks later, I get a call from my wife. I'm at work and she's at home by herself. She's in the basement doing laundry, and she says she smells something burning. I told her that I smelled the same thing and not to worry about it. I get a call a little bit later in the day. She's crying. I guess she went out to get the mail, and when she was returning, she saw a man in the 2nd-story window. It was only briefly, but it was enough to startle her and for her to call the police. Thankfully, the police weren't too far away, and they were able to inspect the house. No one was inside. My wife and I started to piece together that the smell was associated with whatever was going on inside. Whenever we smelled that burning smell, we would always see an apparition of something. Yesterday, I was by myself in my house when I was walking by the basement. I smelled that burning smell again. I was beginning to prepare myself for what I was about to see. Later on in the day, I thought I heard something in the basement. Knowing that I was probably going to see something, I decided not to go down. Being the frightened child that I am, I decided to place some furniture in front of the basement door. This should solve my ghost problem, at least for the night. Later that evening, when I was getting ready for bed upstairs, I could hear the furniture that I placed in front of the basement door being moved. I knew very well that it wasn't a burglar, but I still had to check. I peered down from the 2nd story, down the staircase into the living room. I could see that part of the furniture had been moved, and the basement door was wide open. I went down the stairs and over to the basement door. I mistakenly looked down the stairs, At the bottom of the stairs, slowly crawling upwards, was the red man. At first, I thought he was on fire, but after adjusting, I could finally see that his skin was actually melting off of him. I immediately closed the door, grabbed my keys, and ran out of that house. I didn't even bother turning off any of the lights or even locking the doors. I stayed in a hotel that night, and I called my wife explaining what had happened. We both agreed, right then and there, that we need to sell this house. My friend John invited me and my friends, Charles, Brayden, and Kyle, to stay the weekend up at his cabin in the woods. It was his uncle's cabin, and it needed to be used a few times through the year, just so things would stay maintained, and squatters wouldn't live there. John was reluctant to invite us up. He had told us many times how haunted this cabin was, and he was afraid that we would say no. Me and most of my friends were skeptical about the paranormal. We didn't see it as anything threatening. We saw the invitation as basically a party up in the cabin. I wasn't even remotely afraid. The cabin was an hour's drive, and then a 40-minute hike deep in the woods. So deep, in fact, I am surprised that it got electricity. The last 10 minutes of driving is almost always in the fog, since it was a good bit ways up in the mountains. This weekend was no exception, and we drove deep into the dense fog, turning the current day into a dull dusk despite it only being 4:30. The hike is all uphill, which felt longer since we were tired and weighed down with more stuff. We were coming to the close of our hike when we noticed a dull glow coming from the cabin. We thought that there might be a squatter, so we approached the cabin with John leading the group. We finally reached the cabin and John tried the front door. It was still locked. He unlocked it and briefly checked the cabin, but no one was there. Right then and there, I wanted to leave, but it took us so long to get here and it was almost night. I decided against it. We speculated that either John or his family forgot to turn off the light, or somehow it just turned on while they were away. The cabin itself was actually quite impressive. It was 2 stories, had a nice fire pit out back, and a hot tub. The living room was very large and spacious. It had a big TV and many deer mounts hanging on the wall. I felt uneasy as if there was some dark energy in the air, but I couldn't help to be more than willing to stay, seeing how nice it was inside. We started to unpack and get situated when things began to get weird. I had one of the rooms on the 2nd floor. In the room I was staying in, there was this old rotary phone that looked like it was not able to place a call. It didn't even seem to be connected to anything. I only noticed it because it stuck out like a sore thumb compared to all the nice stuff in the cabin. I picked up the phone to try to hear a dial tone, but I didn't hear anything. I put the phone down on the receiver and began to put my clothes away when the phone rang. It was loud and surprising since I didn't think it was able to work. I answered the phone hesitantly since I was staying in someone else's house. I couldn't hear anything and I asked hello, but no response. I put the phone down and went to put my clothes away again. Once I did that, I went downstairs and mostly everyone was eating food or watching TV, which I gladly joined. The other 2 people were still putting their stuff away upstairs. Everyone but 2 people got their own rooms. We gave that room to the 2 brothers in our group, Brayden and Charles. We joked with them saying that that's what they were used to growing up, when in actuality, they never shared a room before. They were only a grade apart despite being 2 years apart in age and being completely different personalities. The brothers came down from putting their stuff away. The overall atmosphere was great, and we almost forgot about what had happened earlier. It was around 10 o'clock when we started a fire outside in the fire pit. We were enjoying ourselves when John had an idea to play a game called Dead Man. The group fell silent. John explained that Dead Man is where one person hides in the cabin with all the lights off, and we each got 3 matches as light sources to try to find them. If you wanted to play the hard way, you can get a Ouija board involved and summon spirits to throw off the people searching for you. You obviously win when you find the person hiding. Or if anyone turns the lights on because they're too afraid, the person hiding then wins. I simply didn't want to play. Not even a little bit. I was already pretty afraid with what had happened earlier. Everyone's eyes widened with excitement and wanted to play. They were all horror junkies and loved to be afraid all the time. I tried to think about this rationally and prove to myself that there were no such thing as ghosts. I was somewhat intrigued about the concept growing up, but never found anything to support ghosts or anything else that bumps in the night. We finally agreed to play. John then remembered that we had to stop playing by 3:15 a.m. because if we didn't, we couldn't get the spirits to leave. 3:15 was when they were the most powerful and they could stay in our world longer. I rolled my eyes since I knew nothing was going to happen. We drew straws to see who went first, and Charles was the dead man. John then went around the cabin and turned off all the lights. We waited outside by the fire and we took our 3 matches. John then took out a Ouija board and told Charles to summon some spirits to help him hide. They were allowed to play with us as long as they didn't hurt anyone, and they left when they were asked. Charles repeated what he said, but nothing happened. I was expecting that nothing would happen. Charles then got up and hid in the darkness of the cabin. John then counted to 30, after which we slowly entered the eerie darkness of the cabin. Shadows scattered across the floors and walls, painting this horrific silhouette of potential monsters and ghouls. We separated and I lit one of my matches to have a dull orange glow shine a light in a 5-foot radius, which lasted about 5 seconds, before I waved it out. No sign of Charles. I then slowly worked myself into my room upstairs, using another match to make sure I didn't fall down the stairs. I got to my room when the room felt cold. It was cold enough that I could see my breath. I lit my last match, but right before I blew it out, the phone rang. I felt around for the phone and I picked it up. A woman spoke softly. "He's under the bunk bed in the other room." The line went dead and my body began to shake with fear. I left the room and went straight to the other room with the bunk beds and looked under. There was a dark figure hiding under the bed. I reached out and said, "Got you, Charles. You're the dead man." He didn't move. I nudged him again and felt his soft body. "Okay, well, you lose and we're going to do another round." I left the room and went downstairs and back outside. Everyone was outside, including Charles. I started to shake and freak out. "John, there's someone in your cabin upstairs. He's under the bunk bed." Charles said that he was hiding there, so it might have been him, but I insisted that I just left there. We stopped the game and went inside and turned on all the lights. We checked the cabin and no one else was inside other than us. That was it for me. I was done with this game and I didn't even care what anyone else thought. I told everyone about what had happened, about who was under the bed and the woman on the phone telling me about the man. Everyone's eyes were wide with disbelief. Everyone agreed to stop playing since they were all freaked out. We all decided to go to bed and talk about leaving in the morning. We were planning on staying 2 nights, but considering the circumstances, we debated on cutting it short. Since we cut the game short, we forgot to close the Ouija board. Or in other words, we forgot to say goodbye. I went to my room by myself and I went to bed. When I fell asleep, I dreamt about everything that had happened that night with oddly accurate details. I dreamed I was watching us from third-person perspective, while John was explaining the game from earlier. I wasn't the only one watching. There seemed to be a woman and a man wearing a cloak watching the group next to me in my dream. John and Charles just used the Ouija board to ask the spirits to help play the game. The people watching in my dreams started to walk over to the board. John started to count to 30 and soon went inside. The 2 entities in my dream began to move the planchette on the Ouija board. They spelled out 2 words, which made my heart sink into my stomach. They spelled out, "Not spirits." The entity that looked like a woman walked up to me and whispered, "You forgot to say goodbye." I shot up in my bed and I was sweating. I glanced at the clock and the clock read 3:21 a.m. I rubbed my eyes and tried to remember what my dream was about. I got up to use the bathroom when I looked down the long dark hallway. I saw that the bathroom at the end was completely dark. I left my room's light on and took a deep breath and began to make my way down the hallway when I began to remember everything. I froze halfway down the hallway and debated on turning back, but I felt my bladder on the verge of bursting. I continued to the bathroom and felt around for a light switch to turn on. I found it and turned the light on and closed the door behind me. I went to the bathroom and felt absolute dread from behind the shower curtain. I didn't even look at it, but I could feel this electric energy directing my thoughts to open the shower. I hurried to try to use the bathroom quickly when I heard the curtain rings shift ever so slowly. I then heard the curtains move, and I could see from the side view that the curtains were expanding towards me. I immediately turned and ran, not washing my hands or turning off the lights. I heard the curtains snap open and footsteps approach me. I began to cry when I was halfway down the hallway when the light in my room turned off. I was so scared of what was following me that I kept running until I entered the room and slammed the door shut. The footsteps behind me stopped at my door. I could see under the door since the light in the bathroom was still on. I could see someone standing in front of my door. The light in the bathroom turned off, and the knob to my door began to shake frantically. I had no idea what to do. I was considering calling one of my friends to help, but I wasn't sure who was able to help me. I just sat in front of my door in case whatever it was able to get in. I tried to call John, but when I pulled my phone out, the thing trying to get into my room stopped. I looked up in disbelief, wondering what to do next. Right then my phone rang in my hand, scaring me. I looked down to see it was John calling me. I answered and he told me to stay calm and not to come outside. There was something waiting outside my door. I asked what it was and he said he wasn't sure, but it was tall and it was dark. Too tall to be human. I began to panic and I remembered about my dream. I whispered like I did in my dream, "Not spirit." John asked me where I heard that, and I told him about my dream, and he let out a surprised gasp. "We forgot to say goodbye," John said. John called everyone and told them what was happening. He told them that by not saying goodbye, that these things didn't have to leave, and more importantly, they could possibly hurt us. Stephen searches the job wanted page on the newspaper, hopefully to land a new job. It had been several months since he'd been laid off from his programming job due to downsizing. After a few minutes of searching, he finds a security position that pays $40 an hour at a manufacturing warehouse across town. This job seemed amazing, and the qualifications appeared to be minimal. Stephen was above average height, a solid build with a thick mustache that people often complimented him on. He chuckled to himself, thinking that he fit the stereotypical tough guy, even though he was more of a nerd than anything. Stephen called the number on the newspaper, to which an old man answered. After discussing the details of the position, the old man asked Stephen how soon he could start. Stephen, being funny, said he could start right now, to which the old man said, "All right, you start tonight at 7. Stephen drove to the location of business, half an hour before his shift started. The address led him to a warehouse that was near a railroad on the outskirts of town. He parked his car and entered the building to see a small lobby with a lady and an older gentleman with a big gut wearing a gold chain. He assumed that the man was the person he was talking to earlier. "Are you Stephen?" the old man said. Yes I am." "That's wonderful. Let me show you around." "Wow, this guy's to the point," Stephen thought. The old man walked him into an office with 12 monitors on the wall that all projected images from a large warehouse. "This is what you gotta do. At 7 p.m. when everyone leaves, you watch these monitors and make sure no one goes in or out of the room. Do you understand?" He looked on the screens to see that the warehouse was full of these mannequins, hundreds of them, all organized in these very specific lines. The old man gestured to the door. "Come here, I want to show you the room." He followed the old man to the door that was heavily locked. He used a key on 2 different locks and slid the sliding door open, and they walked inside. This warehouse had hundreds of these mannequins. As creepy as they were also equally impressive. They were so organized, but no 2 mannequins were the same. The body features were in different positions, and the faces had unique features. All of them. Normally, mannequins all look similar or mass-produced. Stephen followed the old man out of the warehouse and watched him lock the warehouse door. The old man then gave him keys to the door and walked to the exit of the building. The old man handed him cash up front in an envelope and told him the only rule here is to never open the warehouse door. The old man then left and went outside. A few seconds later, he heard a click on the door the old man just left out of. The door was now locked. The old man had locked Stephen inside. Stephen figured that the keys that he was given would have access to this door, so he didn't pay any mind. On the way back to the security room, he heard a loud bang on the warehouse door. "Hey, new guy, Carl locked me in here on accident. Can you open up?" Steve jumped at first, thinking that he was the only one here. "I was told to never open this door," Stephen said. The voice on the other side said, "Wow, you must be new. You obviously can't leave me in here all night. I need to go home." Stephen hesitated for a few seconds, but then unlocked the locks on the door and opened it. To Stephen's surprise, there was no one behind the door, just the vast number of mannequins, all facing away. All but one. It was in the back of the warehouse and it was out of line, facing towards the door. Stephen went inside and checked all the sides of the warehouse looking for a door that someone could have entered through. Not only could he not find a door, but he wasn't able to find a window or anything. This has got to be some kind of hazing for the new guy, Stephen thought. Spook the new guy. Stephen then walked to the mannequin that was out of position and inspected it to see that it was unique and had these piercing eyes. Stephen then moved the mannequin back in line so it was in line with the others. He slowly made his way out of the warehouse, locking the door behind him. He went into the security room and looked at the video to see if he could find the prankster coworker hiding amongst the mannequins. Sure enough, upon reviewing the tape, he saw one of the mannequins move. The mannequins were so many and so well made that he thought that this would be perfect for any person to blend in. As Stephen watched the tape, he saw about 5 mannequins sneak out of the warehouse. What? How many people are in on this? Stephen bursted out of the security room, not feeling amused, and found 5 mannequins in weird positions in the lobby. He walked up to one of them, inspected it closely, and picked it up, confirming that it was indeed a mannequin. Stephen inspected the lobby and the other offices in the building, and couldn't find anyone else nor another exit for anyone to leave from. He then made his way to the front door, pressed on it, and quickly remembered that the old man had locked it. Stephen was concerned, but figured that the set of keys that he was given had a key on it that could unlock the door. He tried all the keys, but none of them worked. At that moment, he heard banging on the warehouse door again. Stephen was beyond spooked and was even a bit mad. He hurried to open the warehouse door, hoping to catch them in the act. He slid the door open quickly while the pounding was still going on, and to his surprise, all of the mannequins were facing the door. His heart sunk and he felt all of their eyes looking into his soul. He couldn't even think what to do, he was so scared. Suddenly he felt multiple hands grab him from behind and force him into the warehouse. Stephen tried to struggle, but the 5 mannequins behind him were too much for him to handle. The whole warehouse erupted with voices and all the mannequins began to move. Some walked towards him while others went out to the lobby. The mannequins pinned him on the floor and he tried his best to break free. The mannequins weren't very strong, but there were just so many of them. After a few minutes of trying to fight them, he was out of breath. Suddenly, the mannequins that had left had now returned with the big machine. The machine was loud and let out a smell of burnt plastic. Steve was exhausted, but he still tried to break free. The mannequins then placed the machine over him, and he could feel the heat coming off of it. The mannequins then pressed a button on the machine. It began to lower onto him completely, and he couldn't move at all. The next morning at 7 a.m., the old man entered the building to find everything in place. He found the envelope full of money and the set of keys on his desk. He shook his head in disappointment. The warehouse was clean, and it looked the same as when he left it. Later that day, a young woman in her late 20s came in. She was asking about the new security job position that had just opened. The old man then smiled and said, "Yes, let me show you around."